1973 is a strange, uncertain year in America. The Vietnam War is winding down in the way that long and costly things wind down. Not with triumph, not with clean resolution, but with exhaustion and the complicated grief of a country trying to figure out what the last decade meant. The Watergate scandal is unfolding in congressional hearings that the entire nation watches with a combination of fascination and horror. The slow and damning revelation that the people at the highest levels of authority have been lying, and that institutions previously trusted have been corrupted in ways that will not soon be forgiven or forgotten. There is an oil crisis that has people sitting in lines at gas stations for hours. There is inflation. There is a sense, pervasive and difficult to name precisely, that the stable ground of the 1950s and early 60s has shifted permanently underfoot, and no one yet knows what is solid and what is not. This matters because it is the world that Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker live in, not the world of the history books, which will smooth all of this into tidy chapters with clear themes and lessons. The actual world, in real time, in which ordinary things like going to work and going fishing and trying to make sense of the news are performed against a backdrop of quiet collective uncertainty about what America is and where it is going. The year is 1973, and Pascagoula, Mississippi is a working town, not a glamorous place, not a famous place, a place where men wake up before the sun, pull on heavy clothes, drive to the shipyard along the Gulf Coast, and spend their hours doing the kind of labour that leaves marks on the hands and the back. The kind of labour that, when it is over for the day, makes the idea of sitting quietly beside a slow-moving river feel like one of life's small, perfect gifts. Charles Hickson is 42 years old in the autumn of 1973. He is a foreman at the Walker shipyard. He is not the kind of man who makes up stories for attention. His co-workers know him as steady, dependable, a man who keeps his head down and does what needs to be done. He has broad shoulders from years of physical work, and a face that carries the quiet dignity of someone who has learned not to complain. He is a father and a husband, a man with a life built on ordinary, honest things. Calvin Parker is 19. He is newer to the shipyard, newer to most things. At 19, the world is still taking shape around you. You are still learning how to carry yourself, how to speak in rooms full of older men, how to decide what kind of person you want to become. Calvin is quieter than Charles, younger, more uncertain, still in the early chapters of a life he has barely started writing. They are not close friends in the way that people who share everything are close. They are co-workers, familiar in the way that men who work side by side become familiar. They know each other's rhythms, each other's silences, each other's way of moving through a hard day. On the evening of October 11th, 1973, after work is done and the day has loosened its grip, they decide to go fishing. This is as normal as it sounds. This is what you do in Pascagoula when the evening opens up in front of you. You drive out to the river, you set up along the bank, and you let the water and the quiet do their work. The Pascagoula River moves slowly. It is dark and wide and old, lined with cypress and sweet gum, and the kind of dense southern growth that makes you feel surrounded, even when you are outdoors. The light in the evenings falls in long, slanted bars through the trees. The air is humid and warm even in October, thick with the smell of water and mud, and the faint sweetness of whatever is blooming in the undergrowth. It is, in every external way, a perfect evening. Charles and Calvin settle onto the bank near the Shorpeter shipyard. They cast their lines, they sit, they talk the way men talk when they have worked hard together and are not trying to impress anyone, in short sentences, in comfortable silences, in the shared language of people who do not need to perform for each other. Insects drift in the air. Something moves in the brush across the water. The river keeps its slow and indifferent pull toward the Gulf, For a while, nothing happens, and then, very quietly, everything does. The sound. Charles hears it first, or perhaps he simply looks up first. Later, both men will struggle to describe exactly what the sound was, because it does not match anything already filed neatly in the mind under familiar categories. It is not an engine, not the low, steady churn of a motor pushing through water, not the distant mechanical heartbeat of the shipyard or the highway. It is not a helicopter. A helicopter makes a noise, you know, a rhythmic thumping that vibrates in the chest, that you can localize and track as it moves across the sky. This is something else entirely. A zipping or buzzing, high and strange, like a frequency that exists just at the edge of where sounds become feelings rather than sounds. Charles looks up from the water. Later, he will say that he saw it almost immediately, that the object was already there when he looked, as if it had not arrived so much as simply appeared, the way things appear in dreams before you remember that they were not there before. Calvin follows his gaze. For a long moment, neither man says anything at all. There is nothing to say. Language is built for the world you already know, and what they are looking at is not part of any world they have ever been taught to name. Act 2. The craft. The blue light. The object is hovering. That is the first word that comes, and it is the right word, though it does not fully contain what is happening. Hovering implies some kind of engine fighting gravity, some mechanical effort, some wobble or hum that betrays the machinery at work. This object is doing none of those things. It is simply positioned above the ground near the riverbank, the way a thought is positioned in your mind, without weight, without visible effort, without any explanation of how it stays where it is. Charles Hickson will later describe the craft as oblong, roughly oval in shape, perhaps 8 feet tall and 30 feet long. It does not rest on the ground. It does not touch the ground. The distance between the bottom of the object and the earth beneath it seems deliberate, as though the ground is something the craft has chosen not to acknowledge, and it gives off light, not warm light, not the amber warmth of a lantern or a window at night, not the clean focused beam of a spotlight. This light is cold and blue-white, and seems less like illumination and more like a property the object simply has, the way certain deep-sea fish carry their own light, not to see, but simply because that is what they are. The light does not feel friendly. It feels neutral in a way that is worse than hostile. At least hostility implies that something is paying attention to you as a person worth being hostile toward. This light does not seem to care about Charles and Calvin at all. It illuminates them the way a lamp illuminates a room it does not know is occupied. The two men do not move. They are not thinking clearly, because thinking clearly is not something the human nervous system is designed to do when confronted with something this far outside its frame of reference. They are simply there, present, frozen in the particular way that fear produces not action but a kind of absolute stillness, as if the body has decided that the safest thing to do is to pretend to be an object, to become as inert and uninteresting as possible, to let whatever this is pass over them like weather. It does not pass. The opening. A door opens in the craft, or something opens. Some kind of aperture, a seam that parts along the lower body of the object and reveals a brightness beyond it. The opening is not dramatic. It does not creak or hiss. It simply is. And then it is open, the way a mouth can open without making a sound if it chooses to. And through that opening, 3 figures emerge. Here is where the story becomes very difficult to hold in the mind, because what Charles and Calvin will later describe does not fit any template for what a living creature is supposed to look like. The beings are not tall, roughly 5 feet by Hickson's account. Their skin is pale and grey, with a texture he will later describe as similar to elephant skin, thick, wrinkled in places, without the individual variation that human skin carries. Their heads are elongated, bullet-shaped, Where you would expect ears, there are not ears exactly, more like small protrusions, tapered points. Their mouths are thin slits, horizontal lines that do not seem to open in any visible way. There are no eyes, or if there are eyes, they are not arranged or shaped in any way that registers clearly as eyes to a human brain trained for an entire lifetime to find faces and read them. Their hands, or the ends of their arms, are not hands in any familiar sense. Claw-like, perhaps, crab-like in some descriptions, not designed for fine manipulation or gesture or touch, but for something else, something that the observers cannot quite specify. They do not walk, they glide, or they float. Their lower bodies do not appear to articulate the way legs do. They move forward with the same quality as the craft itself, without visible effort, without any mechanical explanation, with the quiet certainty of something that has never needed to justify how it moves through space. This is where the script should resist the temptation to make them monstrous, because the horror is not in monstrousness. The horror is in the quiet. A monster that screams or charges is something you can react to, something you can fight or flee, something that at least acknowledges through its aggression that you are there and you matter enough to threaten. These beings are quiet. They move toward Charles and Calvin the way a technician moves toward a machine that needs servicing, not with malice, not with curiosity, not even with particular interest, with purpose and efficiency and the complete absence of anything that resembles recognition of the two men as anything other than whatever they are there to do with them. That is the part that is hardest to bear, not the aliens, the indifference. Calvin cannot move. Calvin Parker is 19 years old and he has never been so afraid in his life. Fear at that age is different than it will be later. At 19, you have not yet had enough experience with the things that can go wrong in the world to have built any defences against them. You have not yet learned the particular kind of numbed resignation that sometimes comes with being older and having survived bad things. The knowledge that you survived before and presumably will again. You do not have that resource. You only have the raw, unprocessed animal terror of being confronted with something that your entire nervous system is screaming at you is impossible and wrong and dangerous. Calvin's body locks. This is not weakness, this is physiology. When the human brain processes a threat that exceeds its ability to categorize, one possible response is the one that engineers call a cascade failure. Every system attempting to respond simultaneously, and none of them successfully completing a response, producing a paralysis that looks from the outside like stillness but is internally a kind of storm. He cannot run, he cannot call out, he cannot do anything except be there, on the riverbank, with the cold light and the figures moving toward him, and the river behind him, making its slow, indifferent sound against the mud. Charles is older, steadier, and even he is not processing this correctly. He will later say that he tried to think of what to do, tried to locate some category in his experience that covered this situation and offered a course of action. There was none. There is no training for this. There is no protocol. You are simply two men on a riverbank in Mississippi, and something is happening to you that has no precedent. The beings move toward them without hesitation. There is no threat, no display, no warning communication of any kind. They do not gesture or posture or make any sound that could be interpreted as language or intention. They simply come forward, and Charles and Calvin cannot stop them, and the night closes in around them, and the sound of the river disappears into something else entirely. Act 3. Inside the floating. They are moved. That is the most accurate word for it. Not grabbed, not dragged, not carried in the way that implies physical struggle or resistance, or even contact that you fully register as contact. They are moved the way an object on a conveyor belt is moved, not by anything that grips you with intent, but by a force that simply includes you in its direction and takes you with it. Charles Hickson will later say that he felt himself floating, or something like floating, that his legs were no longer doing what legs are for, that the ground was no longer negotiating with his weight in the usual way. He tries, he says, to understand what is happening to his body. He tries to stay conscious and to pay attention and to remember, because somewhere in the part of him that is still functioning like a man and not like an animal in shock, he knows that what happens in the next minutes will matter, will need to be described, will need to be believed. Calvin is past that. Calvin has gone somewhere internal, to whatever place the mind retreats when the external world becomes unbearable. He is not unconscious. He is simply no longer fully present in the way that presence requires engagement with what is happening around you. He is surviving the only way available to him at this moment, which is by not being entirely there. They pass through the opening in the craft, and the world they have known for their entire lives, the dark river, the southern night, the humid air, the ordinary gravity of the planet they were born on, goes away. The examination inside, everything is wrong in a way that is difficult to articulate without sounding imprecise, because imprecision is what the experience produces. Human memory is a filing system built for a world that has consistent rules. When you experience something that violates enough of those rules simultaneously, the filing system cannot process the input correctly. What comes back later is not a clear recording, it is a reconstruction, and reconstructions have gaps. Charles will describe the interior of the craft as having no visible controls, no panels of switches or buttons, no screens or windows, no corridor or doorway that leads to a cockpit or a crew area, no indication that the craft is being operated by anyone from inside. The walls, if they are walls, are smooth and featureless in a way that suggests not poverty of design, but the complete absence of any design made for human eyes or human use. Charles will describe the interior of the craft as having no visible controls, no panels of switches or buttons, no screens or windows, no corridor or doorway that leads to a cockpit or a crew area, no indication that the craft is being operated by anyone from inside. The walls, if they are walls, are smooth and featureless in a way that suggests not poverty of design, but the complete absence of any design made for human eyes or human use. Think about what that means for a moment. Every human-made vehicle carries the imprint of its operators. An aircraft cockpit is a map of human reach and human vision and human limitation. The controls are positioned where hands can find them. The displays are located where eyes can read them. The whole system is organized around the particular biological facts of the creatures who built it and use it. A ship's wheelhouse, a truck cab, a rocket capsule, all of them tell you, through their geometry and their ergonomics, something essential about the beings who designed them. What Charles describes is a space that tells you nothing like that. A space that offers no information about whoever made it or whatever operates it. A space that is not organized around any body type or sensory system that Charles has any point of reference for. This is, in its way, one of the most disorienting details in the entire account. Not the beings themselves, strange as they are, but the implicit evidence of them contained in the space they have made. A space so alien that it does not even accidentally resemble anything human. There is a sense of great brightness, and then of no light at all, and then of something between the two that has no name in the vocabulary of light. The men are separated. Charles is brought to a position, lying perhaps, or suspended, or some orientation that does not map cleanly onto the words we have, and an instrument comes toward him. He will describe it as an eye, a mechanical eye of some kind, an ovoid device that moves with purpose and examines him, not in the way that a doctor examines a patient, with palpation and percussion, and the small communications of a person attending to another person, in the way that a sensor examines a surface, methodically, completely, without any acknowledgement that what is being examined has a self. He cannot speak to the beings. He does not know whether they communicate with each other in any way he could perceive. The silence inside the craft is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of a different kind of presence, of processes happening on frequencies that human senses are not built to receive. He tries to stay calm. He tries to remember. He thinks later that he prayed, though he is not sure in those moments whether any prayer could cross whatever distance had opened between him and everything he had ever known. Calvin, in whatever space he has been placed, is not trying to remember. Calvin is simply enduring. He will later describe what happened as something he could not fully see or fully feel, a blurring at the edges of consciousness, a sense of time passing without the usual markers that allow you to track it. 5 minutes? 40 minutes? He cannot say. The craft does not have a clock in any language he reads. They didn't talk to me at all. They didn't try to communicate. They didn't seem to need to. Charles Hickson, describing the beings inside the craft. The silence. There is a particular quality to helplessness that is different from pain. Pain, at least, is a signal. It tells you something is wrong. It points at a source. It demands attention and response, and is, in its way, a form of communication from your body to your mind. Helplessness is the removal of all of that. It is the state of being unable to signal, unable to respond, unable to do anything except exist and wait for whatever is happening to either stop or continue. Charles keeps trying to think. This is what he will describe: the effort of thinking, of maintaining the thread of himself through an experience that is pulling at that thread from every direction. He looks at the beings. He tries to find in their movements or their arrangement around him some logic, some purpose that he can name. If he can name the purpose, he can perhaps begin to reason about it. If he can reason about it, he is still a person and not merely an object. The beings do not help him with this. They continue their examination in whatever way the examination works, and they do not offer context or comfort or any signal that they are aware of his interiority, his fear, the specific personal horror of being Charles Hickson from Pascagoula, Mississippi, a man with a family and a job and a life and a complete inability to have predicted that any of this would ever happen to him. Calvin comes and goes in his own consciousness. There are moments where he is present enough to perceive something, a sensation, a movement, a light or a sound that he cannot later fully describe, and then the protection of shock draws him back into itself. Time passes. How much time, neither man can say with certainty. Later analysis will suggest perhaps 20 minutes, but time inside the craft does not feel like 20 minutes feels when you are sitting in a waiting room or watching television. It feels like time inside a dream, where duration is measured not in minutes but in the weight of what is happening to you, and then, as quietly as it began, it ends. Act 4. Returned back on the riverbank. They are back on the riverbank. The same bank, the same river, the same October night, the same humid air, the same insects in the same darkness, the same bend of the Pascagoula, moving south toward the same gulf it has always been moving toward. Nothing has changed. The fishing rods are where they left them. The bank is the same bank. The world has continued in their absence with complete indifference to what happened to the two men who were briefly not in it. And the craft is gone, not going, not lifting away in some dramatic departure with light and sound and the visual signature of an exit. Simply gone. The sky above the bank is the same sky it was before, dark, ordinary, occupied only by the ordinary stars and the ordinary Mississippi night. Charles looks at Calvin. Calvin is not all right. He's shaking, and this is not the trembling of cold, but the deep, uncontrollable shaking that comes when the nervous system has been pushed past what it can process and is still trying to discharge what accumulated in it. Calvin is crying, perhaps, or past crying, in a state that does not have a simple name. He is 19 years old, and he has just experienced something that no 19-year-old or 42-year-old or any year-old person in recorded human history has adequate preparation for. Charles is shaken too. He does not pretend otherwise, not then and not later, but he is older and steadier, and he is already beginning to do what men of his temperament do, which is to locate the next practical problem and address it. The next practical problem is this. Something impossible has just happened to them, and they are going to have to decide what to do about it. Charles's first instinct is to have a drink, not out of weakness, out of the very human need to put something warm and familiar into a body that has just been reminded, in the most direct possible way, that it is small and temporary, and at the mercy of forces it does not understand. He finds something to drink. It does not help the way he hoped. Then he says what both of them already know. They have to report this. Calvin does not want to. Calvin's response to this suggestion is the response of someone who understands with perfect clarity that the moment they tell anyone what happened, their lives will never be the same again. Specifically, no one will believe them. Specifically, they will be laughed at, or suspected, or treated as people who have had some kind of episode. They will be the shipyard workers who saw aliens on the Pascagoula River. That will be who they are. That will be what people say about them. And Calvin, who is 19 and has an entire life left to live in Pascagoula among people he knows, does not want that. But Charles says they have to. Because what if others are in danger? Because what if this has happened to other people and no one reported it? Because it is the right thing to do, and Charles Hickson is, at his core, a man who does the right thing even when the right thing is deeply inconvenient. They go. The authorities. They try, first, to reach some kind of military authority. They call Keesler Air Force Base, which is not far away, and are told, politely but firmly, that UFO reporting is not something handled by that installation, and they should contact civilian authorities. So they go to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Fred Diamond is the man who receives their report, and to his credit, to the considerable credit of the Jackson County Sheriff's Department on that particular night, he does not immediately dismiss them. He listens. He takes notes. He looks at these two men, Charles, 42, steady, experienced, clearly shaken, Calvin, 19, barely holding himself together, visibly frightened, and he does not see the body language of men who are making something up. But he also does not see the body language of men he knows how to help, because there is no protocol for this. There is no checkbox on any form in any sheriff's department anywhere in the country for what Charles and Calvin are describing. Diamond asks questions. His deputy, Captain Glenn Ryder, asks questions. They go through the account multiple times, looking for inconsistencies, looking for the place where the story falls apart, the way stories made up, in a hurry, always fall apart when pushed. The story does not fall apart. That is interesting. That is, in fact, very interesting. Diamond and Ryder consider possibilities. They have had a long night, they consider. Could be. They are pulling a prank, they consider. But they are genuinely frightened, which is hard to fake at this level of sustained consistency. They had too much to drink, they consider. But the two men are coherent, their account is specific and detailed, and they came to the sheriff's department voluntarily, which is not what people do when they want to avoid scrutiny. The authorities decide to test them, in the classic fashion, the most basic test available, leave them alone, and listen. The secret recording. Captain Ryder leaves Charles and Calvin in a room together. He tells them he will be right back. He leaves the room. He closes the door. And then he activates a recording device that the room contains, one that has been placed there for exactly this kind of situation. For moments, when what someone says in the absence of an audience is more informative than what they say when they know they are being heard. The theory is simple, and the theory is almost always correct. People who are lying drop the performance when the performance is no longer required. When the door closes and the audience leaves, the liar can finally exhale, finally drop the character, finally say to his co-conspirator something like, "Do you think they bought it?" Or, "We need to get our story straight." Or even just laugh at what they have gotten away with so far. The recording begins, and what is on the recording, what the Jackson County Sheriff's Department hears when they play it back, is not any of those things. What is on the recording is two men who are still terrified. Charles Hickson, speaking in the low, shaken voice of someone who has not yet begun to come down from what he experienced, says things that will later be quoted in nearly every account of the Pascagoula case. He talks about what happened. He talks about the beings. He says, at one point, something to the effect that he almost wishes it had not happened, that he does not know how to carry this, that he has never in his life been so scared, and he has worked hard jobs and lived a hard life, and thought he knew what fear was, and he did not. He says, "I don't want to go to no doctor. I know right now what I saw, and I know right now I ain't crazy." And Calvin, younger and more broken by the experience, weeping in places, says things that suggest a person in the early stages of something like trauma, not shock in the medical sense, but the particular disorientation of someone whose internal model of reality has been cracked open in a way that cannot be immediately repaired. At one point, Charles says to Calvin, "Calvin, when they brought us out, I had to believe it." And Calvin says, "I passed out. I expect I never passed out in my whole life." There's a long silence, and Charles says, "Jesus, Jesus, I never thought I'd see something like that." When Charles and Calvin thought no one was listening, they still sounded terrified. The central mystery of the Pascagoula case. The recording does not prove they were abducted by extraterrestrial beings. It does not prove what they saw or where they went or what happened to them in whatever those 20 minutes were. What it proves is narrower and in some ways more profound. It proves that they believed it, both of them, completely, without any performance for any audience. In the room where there was no reason to keep the story going, the story did not stop. Because for Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, there was no story. There was only what had happened to them. The recording does not prove they were abducted by extraterrestrial beings. It does not prove what they saw or where they went or what happened to them in whatever those 20 minutes were. What it proves is narrower and in some ways more profound. It proves that they believed it, both of them, completely, without any performance for any audience. In the room where there was no reason to keep the story going, the story did not stop. Because for Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, there was no story. There was only what had happened to them. Consider the specific nature of what this recording represents. The Sheriff's Department has deployed one of the oldest and most reliable tools in law enforcement, the private moment. The theory has been proved correct in thousands of investigations across history. When people who are lying believe they are unobserved, the lie collapses. The mask comes off. The relief of finally being able to drop the performance is simply too strong to resist. People laugh. People calculate. People whisper to their accomplices the things they cannot say in the official interview. They show, in the private moment, their real selves. What the recording shows is that Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker's real selves, in the private moment, are two men still in the grip of what they experienced. Not two men catching their breath after a successful deception. Not two men strategizing about their next move. Two men sitting in a room, one of them holding himself together by force of will, the other barely holding himself together at all. Both of them speaking of the night on the river in the way that people speak of things that have actually happened to them, with the fragmented, unpolished, emotionally loaded speech of genuine experience, rather than the too smooth, carefully shaped language of a prepared account. And whatever that was, it had not finished happening in their minds, simply because they had been returned to the bank of the Pascagoula River, and the door of the craft had closed, and the night had resumed its ordinary face. Act 5. The case spreads. The story breaks news. In 1973 moves differently than it moves now. There is no internet, no social media, no immediate global distribution of anything. But what there is wire services, print newspapers, radio stations with local correspondents who know their communities and recognize a strange story when they hear one. And what there is, above all, is human nature. The fundamental inability of most people to be in proximity to something unusual and not tell someone about it. The story gets out. Within days, the Pascagoula River abduction is no longer a matter between Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. It is in the newspapers. It is on the radio. It is spreading through the UFO research community, which in 1973 is small but organized and paying close attention to reports that come with the unusual combination of multiple witnesses, an official report, and the involvement of law enforcement. Charles and Calvin suddenly find themselves in a position they did not ask for and are not prepared for. They are the men who saw something on the Pascagoula River, and everyone wants to talk to them about it. For Charles, this is manageable. He is 42. He has dealt with difficult situations before. He has the life experience to know that attention passes, that the world moves on to its next story, and that what matters most is not how many people are looking at you, but whether you can look at yourself honestly. He talks to reporters. He answers questions. He does not embellish. He does not add drama to a story that already has more drama than he knows how to process. He simply tells what happened, as clearly as he can in the same language he used the first time. For Calvin, it is not manageable. Calvin is 19. He was afraid on the riverbank. He was afraid at the sheriff's department. He was afraid on the recording, and he is afraid now. But the fear has changed. It is no longer just the fear of what happened on October 11th. It is the fear of what is happening now, of cameras and questions, and the particular vulnerability of having something private and shattering become public entertainment, of being known for the worst and most disorienting night of your life, of being reduced to a story that other people tell to each other. He retreats. He does not want to be interviewed. He does not want to discuss it. He wants, more than anything, to go back to being Calvin Parker, a 19-year-old shipyard worker from Mississippi, with an ordinary life and ordinary possibilities, and no famous story attached to his name. That is no longer available to him. The investigator among the people who take serious notice of the Pascagoula case is Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Hynek is, by 1973, one of the most credentialed voices in the world on the subject of unidentified aerial phenomena. He is an astrophysicist and professor who spent years as a scientific consultant to the United States Air Force's Project Blue Book, the official government program tasked with investigating UFO reports, and, in the Air Force's telling, explaining them away. Hynek began that work as a skeptic, expecting to find hoaxes and misidentifications and excitable people who had confused weather balloons and Venus with something more alarming. What he found was more complicated than that. Over the course of his involvement with Blue Book, Hynek came to believe that a subset of UFO reports, a small but persistent subset, could not be explained by any conventional means he could apply to them. These were not the reports of credulous or confused people. They were reports from pilots, from military personnel, from scientists, from the kind of witnesses whose reliability in other contexts would not be questioned. He developed the terminology that is still used today, close encounters of the first, second and third kind, as a way of categorizing the types of contact that witnesses described. Hynek comes to Mississippi and speaks with Charles Hickson. He reviews the evidence. He reads the police reports and listens to what the sheriff's department recorded, and considers what he knows about how people behave when they are making things up versus how people behave when they are describing something real that they cannot explain. He does not say, "This proves extraterrestrial contact." Hynek is a scientist. He does not say things he cannot support with evidence. But what he does say, what he makes clear in his assessment of the Pascagoula case, is that he believes Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker experienced something real, something that frightened them genuinely and deeply. What that something was, he cannot determine. But the witnesses in his evaluation are credible. Their behavior is not the behavior of people who are lying. Their emotional state then and afterward is not the emotional state of hoaxers. Something happened on the Pascagoula River on October 11th, 1973. The question, as Hynek frames it, and as it remains to this day, is not whether. The question is what. The town legend Pascagoula is a working town and a practical town, and working practical towns do not always know what to do with legends. There is a part of the local identity that is, and has always been, slightly embarrassed by the story, aware of how it sounds, aware of the smirks and the late-night jokes, aware that being famous for an alien abduction is not the kind of fame that brings investment and growth and the serious respect of serious people. And there is another part of Pascagoula that is quietly, stubbornly proud of the story, not necessarily because the locals all believe that Charles and Calvin were taken aboard an alien craft, but because strange things happened here, and strange things are interesting, and the evidence, whatever it proves or does not prove, is not nothing. Two men told the same story. A recording made without their knowledge confirmed they believed it. The case was studied by credentialed scientists who did not dismiss it. That is not nothing. In 2019, a historical marker is placed near the alleged abduction site along the Pascagoula River. This is a significant moment. Historical markers do not go up because things might have happened or probably happened or sort of happened. They go up because something happened, and the community has decided that the something is part of its history, part of its identity, part of the story it tells about itself to the world and to future generations who will one day stand on the same bank and look out at the same dark water and try to imagine what those two men felt when they looked up and saw something they could not explain. The river keeps moving. It does not mark the occasion. It has never been particularly interested in human events one way or another. It simply moves, as it has always moved, south toward the Gulf, carrying whatever the land brings it, and leaving no record of what passes over its surface in the dark. Act 6. The Aftermath. Charles lives with it. In the years that follow, October 11th, 1973, Charles Hickson becomes the public face of the Pascagoula encounter. This is partly by circumstance and partly by temperament. He is older, steadier, more capable of holding a story in front of an audience without flinching. He gives interviews. He speaks at UFO conferences. He writes a book, Alien Encounters, published in 1983, in which he describes his account in full, in his own voice, in the direct and unadorned language of a man who is not trying to be a novelist, but simply trying to put the truth down on paper as completely as he can. He does not soften the story for audiences that might find it implausible. He does not add sensationalism for audiences that might find it boring. He tells it the same way every time, with the same details, the same emphasis, the same honesty about the places where his memory is uncertain. consistency, over decades, is not what you would expect from a liar. Liars revise, liars embellish, liars adjust to what their audiences want to hear. Charles Hickson does not adjust, but belief does not bring peace. Understanding does not resolve the fundamental disruption of an experience like this one. Charles carries the event for the rest of his life, not as a burden exactly, but as a weight, something that altered the specific gravity of every day that came after. He becomes, in his way, an advocate not for any particular explanation of what happened to him, but for the simple proposition that something happened, and that people who report similar experiences deserve to be taken seriously, rather than dismissed. He dies in September of 2011. He is 80 years old. He never changed his account. He never retracted anything. He never said, at the end, that it was a mistake, or a hallucination, or a dream. He went to the end of his life as he had lived the decades after 1973, as a man who knew what he had seen and was not going to stop saying so because other people found it inconvenient. Calvin runs from it. Calvin Parker's story is the more painful one. He is 19 years old on the night of October 11th, 1973. He is, by any measure, a boy who becomes something much older, much too fast. Not through experience in any of the normal ways that experience ages a person, but through the sudden, brutal removal of the assumption that the world is comprehensible, that it obeys rules, that nothing is going to happen to you that falls entirely outside the categories your education and culture and community have provided for understanding reality. Calvin does not want to be the alien abduction guy. He wants to be Calvin Parker. He wants to have a life, a real life, with a job and a family, and the ordinary accumulation of days that most people take so completely for granted that they never think to be grateful for it. He wants to not be remembered only for one night on a riverbank, when he was too frightened to run and too young to know how to carry what happened afterward. For years, he withdraws. He does not give interviews. He does not attend conferences. He does not append himself to the UFO community's discussions of his own experience. He moves, lives quietly, tries to build the life he wanted. He struggles. The event follows him, not because anyone is chasing him with it, but because trauma does not require external maintenance. It maintains itself in the gaps between sleep and waking, in the moments when something in the ordinary world touches a corner of what happened on October 11, and the whole night comes rushing back with the kind of clarity that only fear can produce. Decades later, in 2018, he publishes a book of his own, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story. He is in his 60s by this point, and the decision to write it is not about fame or money or the appetite for attention that he never had. It is something else, the recognition perhaps that carrying something alone for 45 years does not diminish its weight, and that putting it into words and giving it to the world might finally allow him to set it down. He describes additional encounters in the book, experiences he says happened to him before and after the night on the river. He describes the ongoing psychological weight of the original event. He describes what it felt like to be 19 and have your entire understanding of reality fractured in a single evening, and then to have to spend the next 5 decades rebuilding something in its place. He is the more tragic figure in the story, not because he suffered more, perhaps he did not. The inside of Charles Hickson's experience is not something anyone but Charles could know. He is the more tragic figure because he is the reminder that whatever happened on October 11th, 1973 had a price, and the price was not paid in the craft during whatever 20 minutes those were. It was paid in every year that came after. The final question. The Pascagoula River is still there. It does not know that it is famous. It does not know that its name has been spoken in documentary films and academic papers and late-night conversations and UFO conventions in dozens of countries. It is a river. It moves south. It carries what it carries, and it does not explain itself. This is the proper behaviour of a river, and it is also, in a strange way, the perfect symbol for the Pascagoula case itself, something that moves through the world without stopping to offer an explanation, carrying a mystery in its current that the people on its banks have been trying to name for more than 50 years. Charles Hickson is gone. He died in 2011, and he died still saying what he had always said, without revision, without retraction, with the same flat and certain honesty that characterized everything he put into words after October 11th, 1973. Calvin Parker lives. He has told his story, finally, in his own way and his own time. He has come to some accommodation, perhaps, with what happened to him. Not acceptance, necessarily, because acceptance implies that there is something understood well enough to accept, and there is not. But some form of continuing, the way people continue after things happen that they did not choose and cannot undo. The marker stands near the river now, a few words of bronze and stone that do not say what happened but say that something happened, and that the community has decided this something is worth remembering. And the question remains. It remains not as a rhetorical device, not as a dramatic flourish at the end of a documentary, not as a way to leave the audience with a feeling of pleasurable mystery and then go about their evening. It remains as a genuine question, unresolved, carried now by everyone who has heard the story and tried to put it into a category and found that no category quite contains it. This is worth sitting with for a moment. We live in an era of explanation. We have more information available to us right now, at this moment, than any human being in the entire history of civilization has ever had access to. We carry in our pockets devices that can answer most questions in seconds. We have databases of scientific literature and historical records and eyewitness testimony from across the world and across centuries. We have radar data and satellite imagery and instruments sensitive enough to detect a comet passing through the outer reaches of the solar system. We are, by almost any measure, the most informed and technologically capable civilization that has ever existed on this planet, and we still do not know what happened on the Pascagoula River on October 11th, 1973. That not knowing is not comfortable, and that discomfort is informative. We have grown accustomed to the idea that the not knowing is temporary, that science will eventually explain everything, that the frontier of mystery will continue to shrink as knowledge advances, that the things we cannot yet explain are simply things we have not yet gotten around to explaining. The Pascagoula case sits outside that comfortable framework. It is not a mystery waiting for more data. It is a mystery that has had more than 50 years of scrutiny and remains, at its core, unresolved. Not because no one tried to resolve it, because the thing that happened does not submit to resolution. If it was a lie, and there are people who have always said it was a lie, always will say it was a lie, who find in the implausibility of the account all the explanation they need, then why did they tell the same lie when they thought they were alone? Why, in the privacy of that recorded room, with the door closed and the sheriff gone and no audience to perform for, did they not drop it? Why did Charles Hickson's voice on that tape carry the specific quality of a man who is still frightened rather than a man who is congratulating himself on a successful performance? If it was a mistake, mass hysteria, shared delusion, some natural phenomenon that two exhausted men misidentified under conditions of low light and high stress, then how did both of them independently describe the same impossible specific details? The same grey skin, the same bullet-shaped heads, the same gliding movement, the same mechanical eye inside the craft. Shared delusion is real, but it does not typically produce that degree of specificity and consistency across two separate accounts. And if it was real, if on October 11th, 1973, something came down over the Pascagoula River and two ordinary men were taken aboard it, and examined and returned to the bank and left to figure out how to live the rest of their lives with what they knew. Then what was it? Where did it come from? What were the beings looking for? Did they find it? And are they finished? If it was a lie, why did they stay afraid when no one was listening? If it was a mistake, why did both men describe the same impossible thing? And if it was real, what came down over the Pascagoula River that night? The river keeps moving. It has no answers. It only has direction. South. Always south. Toward the Gulf, toward the open water, toward whatever lies beyond the horizon that you cannot see from the bank on a dark October night, no matter how long you stand there and look. Somewhere in Mississippi tonight, the river is doing what the river does, moving through the dark without explanation, carrying its secrets the way water always carries its secrets. Not hidden, exactly, not protected or defended, simply present in a language that human beings have not yet learned to read. The stars are there too, the same stars that were there on October 11th, 1973, positioned in their usual indifferent arrangements across a sky so large that all of human history, every building we have constructed, and every road we have paved, and every story we have ever told about ourselves, occupies something so close to nothing within it that the difference hardly registers. We are small. We have always been small. For most of our existence as a species, we knew that. The night reminded us of it every evening reliably without sentiment. Then we built electric lights and pushed the night back, and we began to forget. But the night is patient. The stars are patient. And somewhere out there, in the dark beyond the dark, in the space between the stars that no map of ours has ever fully accounted for, something may know with complete precision exactly how small we are. Charles Hickson knew. Calvin Parker knew. They knew it on a riverbank in Mississippi on an October night in 1973 when something came out of that darkness and showed them. Sleep well. The river will still be there in the morning.